There's a moment in every person's life when they realize that fighting back makes them weaker, not stronger. When they understand that the people throwing stones aren't worth the energy it takes to dodge them. When they finally see that the biggest power move isn't proving everyone wrong, it's disappearing completely and letting your absence do the talking. Marcus Chen learned this lesson at 32 years old, sitting in a coffee shop across from his own office building, watching people who once called him friend walk through doors he'd helped build. He learned it when his phone stopped ringing, when his inbox filled with silence instead of opportunities, when he realized that staying in the game was exactly what his enemies wanted, because a visible target is an easy target. What happened next wasn't revenge. It was something far more terrifying to those who'd pushed him out. It was strategic invisibility. It was the art of becoming a ghost while building an empire in the shadows. It was Machiavelli's most dangerous teaching brought to life. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. This is the story of a man who lost everything by being too present, too vocal, too easy to find. And this is the story of how he came back untouchable, not by fighting the system, but by becoming someone the system couldn't afford to ignore. The drama thought it broke him. The drama was wrong. Marcus Chen had always believed that hard work spoke for itself. For 7 years at Innovate Solutions, he'd proven this belief right. He'd started as a junior project manager and climbed to senior director through nothing but results. Weekends spent drafting proposals, nights spent on client calls across time zones. Holidays sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines. The company's revenue had doubled during his tenure, and everyone knew Marcus was a major reason why. But success has a strange way of painting targets on people's backs. It started small, the way poison always does. Sarah Mitchell, the new VP of Operations, joined the company 6 months before everything fell apart. She came from a competitor with impressive credentials and an even more impressive ability to smile while sliding knives between ribs. During her first week, she sat in on one of Marcus's client presentations. He'd nailed it. A $3 million contract secured with a strategy he'd spent 2 months perfecting. After the meeting, Sarah cornered him by the elevator. "Great presentation," she said, her voice sweet as artificial sugar. "Though I noticed you took credit for the pricing model. Wasn't that from the finance team's template?" Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "The template was basic. I restructured it completely for this client's needs. Finance signed off on my version." Of course. Her smile never wavered. "Just making sure proper credit goes where it's due. Team effort and all that." That conversation should have been his warning. Instead, Marcus brushed it off. He had work to do, clients to serve, results to deliver. He didn't have time for office politics. That was his first mistake. Over the next 3 months, the attacks became more sophisticated. Sarah started CCO on emails where she'd gently correct Marcus's approaches. She'd schedule meetings during his client calls, then express concern about his availability when he couldn't attend. She built alliances with other executives by offering them credit for Marcus's projects, positioning herself as a team builder while painting Marcus as someone who hoarded glory. The worst part? It worked. Marcus noticed the shift in how people treated him. Colleagues who once sought his advice started going to Sarah instead. His ideas in meetings received lukewarm responses. Then Sarah would rephrase the same concept minutes later to enthusiastic agreement. When he raised concerns directly to his boss, he was told he was being paranoid and needed to be more of a team player. "Sarah's just trying to optimize our processes," his boss explained, looking at his computer screen instead of at Marcus. Maybe you're feeling threatened because you're used to being the star. It's time to share the spotlight. Marcus left that meeting feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. He'd never cared about being a star. He cared about doing good work. But somehow Sarah had convinced everyone that his confidence was arrogance, his competence was selfishness, and his track record was just luck combined with taking credit for others. The breaking point came during the annual strategy retreat. Marcus had spent weeks preparing a presentation on expanding into new markets. He'd researched competitors, analyzed data, built financial models, and created a roadmap that could generate millions in new revenue. He was scheduled to present on the second day. The night before his presentation, Sarah hosted a dinner for the executive team at an expensive restaurant. Marcus wasn't invited. He found out about it from an assistant who accidentally mentioned it while discussing lunch plans. The next morning, Sarah presented first. Marcus sat in the conference room, coffee growing cold in his hands. as she unveiled a market expansion strategy. His market expansion strategy. She'd taken his research, his models, his roadmap, and presented it as her own work. The only difference was she'd added her name to every slide and changed the font. Marcus felt the room spin. He looked around at his colleagues, waiting for someone to notice, to object, to say something. But everyone nodded along, taking notes, offering congratulations on Sarah's innovative thinking. When she finished, the CEO stood and applauded. "This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership we need. Sarah, I want you to lead this initiative personally. We'll allocate whatever resources you need." Marcus's presentation was cancelled due to time constraints. He sat through the rest of the retreat in a fog, watching Sarah receive praise for months of his work. When he finally confronted her in the hallway during a break, she looked at him with those cold, calculating eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. "I've been working on this strategy for months. If your research happened to reach similar conclusions, well, great minds think alike." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But if you make accusations like this publicly, I'll have to question your stability. Stress can do strange things to people." That night, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, laptop open to a document he'd been updating. Evidence. Emails. File timestamps. Meeting notes. Everything that proved the strategy was his. He stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the send button to email the CEO. Then he closed the laptop, because he realized something that changed everything. Fighting Sarah directly would destroy him, not her. She'd already poisoned the well. She'd already built her alliances. She'd already positioned him as the problem. If he sent that email, he'd be seen as bitter, petty, unable to handle someone else's success. He'd become the difficult employee, the one who couldn't work in a team, the one who had to be managed out. Sarah had won. Or so it seemed. Marcus spent the next week in a strange state of clarity. He watched the office dynamics with new eyes. He saw how Sarah operated, always smiling, always helpful on the surface, always positioning herself as the reasonable one while systematically destroying anyone who threatened her position. He watched how eagerly people believed her narrative because it was easier than acknowledging they'd been manipulated. And he realized he was playing the wrong game entirely. He'd been trying to win at office politics, but office politics was a game designed for people like Sarah, people who valued perception over reality, who understood that being seen as successful was more important than actually being successful, who knew that controlling the narrative was more powerful than controlling the facts. Marcus couldn't beat Sarah at her own game, but he didn't have to, because there was another game entirely, one she didn't even know existed. The idea came to him during a client call. He was talking to David Park, CEO of a mid-sized tech company, about a potential project. David mentioned he was frustrated with his current consulting firm. They were good at presenting but weak on execution. He needed someone who could actually deliver results, not just PowerPoint slides. "I know someone," Marcus started to say, then stopped himself. He didn't know someone else. He was someone else. Or he could be. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to fight Sarah. He wasn't going to try to expose her. He wasn't going to waste energy trying to convince people who'd already made up their minds. He was going to do something far more powerful. He was going to disappear. He opened his laptop and began writing his resignation letter. Not angry, not accusatory, just professional and brief. He thanked the company for the opportunities, cited personal reasons for his departure, and gave standard 2 weeks' notice. When he submitted it the next morning, his boss looked relieved. "I think this is the right choice for everyone," he said, barely hiding his satisfaction. "Sarah's been expressing concern about your attitude lately. A fresh start will be good for you." Marcus smiled and nodded. He didn't correct the narrative. He didn't defend himself. He just agreed and walked out. Sarah sent him a message later that day. "Sorry to hear you're leaving. I hope you find what you're looking for. Sometimes it's hard when the work environment becomes too challenging." Marcus read the message twice, memorizing every calculated word. Then he deleted it without responding, because responding would mean she still had power over him. Silence, he was learning, was its own form of power. During his final 2 weeks, Marcus did something unexpected. Instead of coasting or creating problems, he worked harder than ever. He documented every project, every client relationship, every process he'd developed. He created detailed handover notes. He made himself available for questions. He was the model departing employee. People found this confusing. Some assumed he was angling for a counteroffer. Others thought he was just trying to leave on good terms for future references. Only Marcus knew the truth. He was studying. He was learning exactly how the company operated, who the real decision makers were, what the actual pain points were behind the corporate speak. He was gathering intelligence. On his last day, there was a small goodbye gathering in the break room. Sarah gave a speech about how difficult it was to lose team members, but how sometimes people needed to find their path. Marcus ate cake, shook hands, and smiled. When he walked out of the building for the last time, carrying a box of his belongings, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. The drama thought it had won. The drama had no idea what was coming. Marcus spent the first week of unemployment doing something unusual. Nothing. He didn't apply for jobs. He didn't network. He didn't panic about his dwindling savings. He just thought. He went for long walks, read books he'd been putting off, and let his mind process everything that had happened. By the end of that week, he had a plan. It wasn't about getting another corporate job. It wasn't about proving Sarah wrong. It was about building something she couldn't touch, couldn't steal, couldn't corrupt. It was about becoming untouchable. He registered a consulting firm, naming it something generic. Strategic Growth Advisors. He built a simple website that emphasized results over flash. He wrote white papers on industry challenges he'd solved at Innovate Solutions, careful to anonymize the company but detailed enough to showcase his expertise. He reached out to old clients, not asking for work but offering insights on their industries. Most importantly, he stayed invisible. No social media announcements. No LinkedIn updates about his new venture. No press releases or public launches. He was building in the shadows, and shadows were where real power grew. Within 3 weeks, he had his first client, David Park, the CEO from his last days at Innovate Solutions. David had remembered their conversation and reached out when his current consultant dropped the ball on a critical project. Marcus delivered results in half the time for half the cost, and David was impressed enough to introduce him to 2 other CEOs. Marcus learned something crucial during those early months. When you're not fighting for recognition, you have all your energy for actual work. When you're not defending yourself from office politics, you can focus on results. When you're invisible, you're unstoppable. He worked from coffee shops in his apartment, meeting clients early mornings or late evenings to fit their schedules. He underpromised and overdelivered on every project. He built a reputation not through marketing or networking events, but through the oldest form of advertising, word of mouth from satisfied clients. And he made sure every single one of his early clients was somehow connected to his old company's ecosystem, not as revenge, but as strategy. Because Marcus understood something Machiavelli had written 500 years ago. The best fortress is to not be hated by the people. He wasn't trying to destroy Innovate Solutions. He was trying to become indispensable to the same markets they served. He was building a parallel empire that would eventually intersect with theirs, but from a position of strength they couldn't attack or undermine. 6 months after leaving, Marcus had 12 clients and more work than he could handle alone. His income had already surpassed his old salary, but more importantly, he'd built something that was truly his, something that couldn't be stolen in a meeting room or undermined by office gossip. He thought about Sarah sometimes, wondered if she'd noticed his absence or if she'd already moved on to her next target. He thought about his old colleagues and whether they were happy with the choice they'd made to believe her over him. Mostly, though, he didn't think about them at all because he was too busy building. The Ghost Protocol wasn't about revenge. It was about something more powerful, irrelevance, making the drama that once defined his life completely irrelevant to his success. And as Marcus closed his laptop after landing another major client, he realized something profound. The best way to win a game you can't win is to stop playing it entirely and create a new game where you make the rules. The old Marcus had fought for his place at a table where he wasn't wanted. The new Marcus was building his own table. And soon, very soon, the people who'd pushed him away would be begging for a seat. 12 months after walking out of Innovate Solutions, Marcus stood in his new office, a modest space in a shared building downtown. Nothing flashy but professional. He'd hired his first employee, Jennifer, a brilliant analyst who'd been laid off from a corporate restructuring and was hungry for meaningful work. He'd turned down 10 potential clients that month alone because he was selective about who he worked with. And most significantly, he'd just received a phone call that confirmed everything he'd been building toward. "We need to talk about our consulting firm," the voice on the phone had said. It was Richard Torres, CEO of Innovate Solutions, Marcus's old company. "We're hemorrhaging clients, and I'm hearing your name come up repeatedly as the reason why." He'd kept his voice neutral, professional, and completely unreadable. When he hung up, he'd allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to smile before returning to work. But this moment was 18 months in the making, and it hadn't been easy. After his first year of success, Marcus had faced a crossroads. He could scale up quickly, hire aggressively, and compete directly with firms like Innovate Solutions. That was the obvious path, the American dream of entrepreneurship. Grow fast, grab market share, make noise. But Marcus had learned that obvious paths were usually traps. Instead, he'd done something counterintuitive. He'd stayed small deliberately. He'd turned away clients who wanted quick fixes or who weren't willing to implement real changes. He'd declined partnership opportunities with larger firms that would have given him immediate credibility. He'd rejected every media interview request and speaking engagement that came his way. Because Marcus understood that in business, mystique was often more valuable than visibility. When potential clients heard about strategic growth advisors, they heard whispers, not advertisements. They heard about results from trusted sources, not sales pitches. The firm had become what luxury brands understood intuitively. Exclusivity creates demand. Jennifer had questioned this approach during her second week. "We could triple our revenue if we just marketed ourselves," she'd pointed out, showing him a spreadsheet of potential opportunities. "Your LinkedIn profile hasn't been updated in over a year. We don't even have a proper social media presence. How are people supposed to find us?" Marcus had looked up from the client report he was reviewing. "They're not supposed to find us. They're supposed to discover us. There's a difference." "That sounds like something from a fortune cookie," Jennifer had replied, but she'd smiled. "Think about it this way," Marcus had explained. "Right now, every client we have came through a personal referral from someone whose business we genuinely improved. They trust us before we even meet them because someone they trust vouches for us. If we start marketing, we become just another consulting firm making promises. We lose what makes us special." Jennifer had nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "We're building social proof, not brand awareness." "Exactly. And social proof is harder to fake and more valuable than any advertisement." This strategy had paid off in unexpected ways. When Marcus walked into meeting rooms now, he often had more leverage than the potential clients who'd requested the meetings. They needed him more than he needed them, and everyone in the room knew it. This dynamic shift was intoxicating, but Marcus was careful not to let it go to his head. His old mentor, Professor Williams from business school, had once told him that power corrupts when people mistake it for identity rather than responsibility. Marcus thought about those words often, especially when dealing with clients who reminded him of his younger self. Ambitious, hardworking, but naive about office politics. One such client was Amanda Reeves, a director at a mid-sized marketing firm who'd reached out after her ideas kept being stolen by her boss. During their first meeting, she'd been close to tears describing her situation. "I've documented everything," she'd said, showing him folders of evidence. "I'm going to take it to HR and to the executive team. I'm going to prove what he's been doing." Marcus had recognized the desperation in her voice because he'd felt it himself 18 months earlier. "Amanda, can I be honest with you about what will happen if you do that?" She'd looked up, hopeful that he'd support her plan. "You'll lose," Marcus had said gently. "Even if everything you're saying is true, even if you have perfect documentation, you'll lose. Because he controls the narrative, and you'll be fighting against people's desire to believe everything is fine." Amanda's face had fallen. "So, I should just let him keep stealing my work? Just accept it?" "No. You should stop playing his game and start playing yours. Let me ask you something. Why do you want to prove he's stealing your work?" "Because it's wrong. Because I deserve credit. Because you want justice," Marcus had finished. "I understand." I felt the same way. But justice in corporate environments is rare and usually comes at a cost that isn't worth paying. What if instead of fighting for credit at a company that's already shown you it doesn't value fairness, you built something where credit doesn't matter because the results speak for themselves? That conversation had led to Marcus consulting for Amanda on a side project she'd been considering, a boutique marketing agency focused on ethical brands. 6 months later, she'd quit her job and her new agency was thriving. Her old boss eventually got caught stealing from someone more connected than Amanda and was fired. But by then, Amanda didn't care. She'd moved beyond that drama entirely. This became a pattern in Marcus's work. He wasn't just a business consultant anymore. He was helping people escape toxic situations by building alternative paths. Each person he helped became part of a growing network of professionals who'd chosen authenticity over politics, substance over appearance, results over perception. And this network was starting to cause problems for companies like Innovate Solutions. Marcus first heard about the troubles at his old company from David Park, his first client. You know they lost the Henderson account, right? David had mentioned casually over lunch. Sarah Mitchell completely botched the implementation. Turns out she's great at presentations, but terrible at execution. Henderson started asking around for alternatives, and 3 people independently recommended you. Marcus had simply nodded. But internally, he'd felt a grim satisfaction, not because Sarah was failing, that gave him no pleasure, but because reality was finally catching up with perception. The smoke and mirrors only work until someone asks for substance. Over the following months, Marcus heard more stories. Projects at Innovate Solutions were running over budget and behind schedule. Client satisfaction scores were dropping. Several of their best analysts had quit. Tired of working in an environment where credit went to whoever presented rather than whoever performed. The CEO had apparently hired a consulting firm to diagnose their problems. But according to Marcus's sources, the report had blamed market conditions rather than addressing the leadership issues. Marcus could have exploited this situation aggressively. He could have actively poached their clients or their talent. He could have gone to industry conferences and positioned himself as the alternative to failing firms like Innovate Solutions. But he didn't, because aggressive moves would have made him visible as a threat, and visible threats get attacked. Instead, he simply continued doing excellent work. When clients came to him frustrated with other firms, he listened and delivered. When talented professionals reached out looking for opportunities, he was selective but welcoming. When industry publications asked for his perspective on consulting trends, he declined politely and recommended other experts. He remained a ghost in the industry, known by those who mattered but invisible to those who didn't. Jennifer had grown into her role brilliantly during this time. She'd developed her own client relationships and was now handling smaller projects independently. One evening, as they were closing up the office, she'd asked Marcus something that had been on her mind. "Do you ever think about what you'd say if you ran into Sarah Mitchell somewhere?" Marcus had considered the question. "I used to rehearse conversations in my head, clever comebacks, ways to let her know I'd succeeded despite her. But honestly, I don't think about her much anymore. She's become irrelevant to my life. That must feel good," Jennifer had said. "It feels freeing," Marcus had corrected. When someone who hurts you becomes irrelevant, it means you've genuinely moved past them. You're not suppressing anger or pretending not to care. You actually don't care because your life has become about something bigger than that conflict. This conversation came back to Marcus as he prepared for his meeting with Richard Torres. He had no interest in gloating or proving points. He was meeting with Richard because the CEO had reached out, and it was good business to take the meeting. What happened after that would depend on what Richard wanted and whether it aligned with Marcus's values. The coffee shop Richard had suggested was upscale and quiet, the kind of place where business deals happened over expensive lattes. Richard arrived exactly on time, looking older than Marcus remembered. The stress of running a struggling company showed in the lines around his eyes and the tightness in his shoulders. "Marcus, thank you for meeting with me," Richard began, shaking his hand firmly. "I'll cut to the chase. We've made some mistakes in our operations since you left. Several clients have moved to your firm, and others have mentioned you when expressing dissatisfaction with our services. I want to understand what we're doing wrong and what you're doing right." Marcus appreciated the directness. "What specific feedback have you received from clients?" Richard sighed and pulled out his tablet, showing Marcus a summary of exit interview data. The complaints were consistent: over-promising and under-delivering, focus on presentation over implementation, lack of follow-through, disconnected leadership who didn't understand the actual work. "This is fixable," Marcus said after reviewing the data, "but it requires cultural change, not just process change. Are you prepared for that level of transformation?" "That's why I'm here," Richard said. "I know we didn't part on the best terms. I know I sided with Sarah when you raised concerns. I've since learned that was a mistake. She's created a culture where appearing successful is more important than being successful, and it's killing us. Marcus studied Richard's face, looking for signs of manipulation or deflection. He saw only exhaustion and genuine concern. What are you asking from me, Richard? I want to hire you as a consultant to help us fix this. I know it's awkward given our history, but you're the best person for this job. You understand our company because you built much of what works. And clearly, you understand how to create a culture that actually delivers results. It was the offer Marcus had imagined during his darkest days after leaving Innovate Solutions. Vindication, recognition, the chance to come back in a position of power. But now that it was here, he felt no triumph, just careful consideration. I need to think about it, Marcus said finally. This isn't about money or pride. It's about whether I can actually help you create lasting change, or if I'd just be another consultant who writes a report that gets ignored. Give me a week to consider. Richard looked surprised but nodded. Fair enough. I respect that you're not jumping at the opportunity. That actually tells me more about why you're successful than any sales pitch would. After Richard left, Marcus sat in the coffee shop for another hour, thinking. This decision would define the next phase of his journey. He could take the contract and prove to everyone at Innovate Solutions that he'd been right all along. But proving points wasn't why he'd built Strategic Growth Advisors. He built it to do meaningful work in a way that aligned with his values. The question wasn't whether he could fix Innovate Solutions. The question was whether fixing Innovate Solutions would compromise what he built, both professionally and personally. Because the Ghost Protocol wasn't just about business strategy. It was about protecting his peace, his integrity, and his power by staying true to the principles that made him untouchable in the first place. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Jennifer. Clear my calendar for tomorrow morning. I need to make a decision about something important and I want your input. The Innovate Solutions offer? She asked. How did you know? I've been watching their situation deteriorate for months. It was only a matter of time before they came crawling back. The question is whether we're interested in rescue missions or if we stick to our model. Jennifer understood. Let's figure that out tomorrow. As he walked back to his car, Marcus realized something profound had shifted. A year and a half ago, an offer like this would have consumed him with conflicting emotions. Vindication, anger, satisfaction, doubt. Now, it was simply a business decision to be made with clear thinking and strategic consideration. The drama of his past had truly become irrelevant. He'd become untouchable not by being invulnerable to attacks, but by building a life where attacks didn't matter. The ghost had built something real in the shadows. Now he had to decide whether to step into the light or whether the light was exactly what he needed to avoid to maintain his power. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place to be is visible. And sometimes, the most powerful move is the one nobody sees coming. Marcus made his decision about Innovate Solutions on a Tuesday morning, sitting in his office with Jennifer and a whiteboard covered in pros, cons, and strategic considerations. The answer, when it came, was both simpler and more complex than he'd expected. I'll take the contract, he told Richard over the phone that afternoon. But not in the way you're imagining. I'm not coming in as a traditional consultant to write reports and give recommendations. If we do this, I have complete operational authority over the transformation, and I work directly with your team without interference. You'll get monthly progress reports, but you don't get to micromanage the process. There was a long pause on the other end. That's more aggressive than I expected. Richard, you're not hiring me for advice. You can get advice from 100 consultants who'll tell you to improve communication and streamline processes. You're hiring me because your company is dying and you know it. I can fix it, but only if I have the authority to make real changes. Otherwise, we're both wasting our time. Another pause. Then, what's your fee structure? Marcus quoted a number that made even Jennifer's eyes widen when he'd first calculated it. It was triple what traditional consultants charged, with a performance bonus tied to specific metrics: client retention, employee satisfaction, and revenue growth. High risk, high reward. Done, Richard said. When can you start? I need to ensure my current clients are covered. And Richard, one more condition. I don't report to Sarah Mitchell. She either reports to me during this engagement or she's not part of the transformation. She'll report to you, Richard said without hesitation. I've already had that conversation with her. She's not happy about it, but she understands the situation. After hanging up, Jennifer looked at Marcus with a mixture of admiration and concern. You know she's going to try to sabotage you, right? There's no way Sarah Mitchell accepts being subordinate to you after everything that happened. I'm counting on it, Marcus said calmly, because this time she'll be trying to sabotage me in an environment where I control the rules and everyone's watching her every move. She'll expose herself. Jennifer shook her head, smiling. Machiavelli would be proud. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Marcus studied everything he could about Innovate Solutions' current state. Financial reports, client feedback, employee surveys, project outcomes. He built a transformation plan that was ruthlessly honest about the company's problems and equally clear about the solutions. Most importantly, he prepared himself mentally for re-entering an environment that had once nearly destroyed him. His first day back at Innovate Solutions felt surreal. He walked through the familiar lobby, rode the same elevators, past offices where he'd once worked. But everything felt different, because he was different. He wasn't the employee hoping for recognition anymore. He was the external consultant with authority to change everything, backed by a CEO desperate enough to give him that power. The all-hands meeting Richard had called started at 9. Marcus stood at the front of the conference room, looking at faces he recognized. Some friendly, some hostile, most carefully neutral. Sarah sat in the back row, her expression professionally blank but her eyes burning with barely concealed rage. "Good morning," Marcus began. "Most of you know who I am. For those who don't, I'm Marcus Chen. I left this company 18 months ago, and I've been brought back to help transform our operations. I want to be clear about something from the start. I'm not here for revenge, vindication, or to settle old scores. I'm here because Richard asked me to help save this company, and I believe it can be saved." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, a graph showing the company's declining performance metrics. This is where we are. Client retention down 30%, employee satisfaction at an all-time low. Revenue flat despite a growing market. We're losing to competitors who aren't more talented than us, just more honest with themselves about their problems. Marcus walked them through his analysis, pulling no punches about what was broken. Poor project management. Misaligned incentives that rewarded looking good over being good. A culture where political maneuvering mattered more than actual competence. By the end of his presentation, the room was uncomfortably silent. "Over the next 6 months, we're going to fix this," Marcus continued. "But it's going to require honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change how we've always done things. Some of you won't like these changes. Some of you will push back. Some of you will try to undermine the process because it threatens your position. To those people, I say this clearly. I don't have time for politics or games. If you're not willing to focus on results over appearance, this isn't the right place for you anymore." After the meeting, people approached Marcus with various reactions. Some were excited about the changes, others were defensive. A few were clearly trying to figure out where he stood and how to position themselves. Marcus listened to all of them, took notes and made mental assessments about who was genuinely interested in improvement versus who was just trying to survive. Sarah approached him last after everyone else had left. "Quite the presentation," she said, her voice tight. "Very inspiring." "Thank you," Marcus replied neutrally. "I assume you'll want to meet with my team to discuss operations?" "Actually, I want to meet with you first." "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., in Richard's office. Bring your performance data for the last 18 months. Sarah's smile faltered. "Performance data? Client outcomes, project completion rates, team retention metrics, the usual measures of actual performance." "I don't think Richard specified that I'd need to—" "I'm specifying it," Marcus interrupted gently. "See you tomorrow at 9. He walked away before she could respond, knowing he'd just fired the first real shot in a battle Sarah thought she'd already won. The meeting the next morning was brutal in its simplicity. Marcus laid out Sarah's performance data, which told a damning story. Of the 12 major projects she'd led since Marcus left, 7 had gone over budget, 5 had missed deadlines, and 3 had resulted in clients leaving the company. Her team had a 60% annual turnover rate, meaning more than half of her staff quit every year. "These numbers don't lie," Marcus said, sliding the report across Richard's desk. Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, her face pale. "You're an exceptional presenter and a talented politician, but you're a poor operations leader. The company promoted you based on potential rather than proven results, and it's cost us millions."
"This is absurd," Sarah said, finding her voice. "You're cherry-picking data to make me look bad."
"What about the Henderson account? What about the Morrison expansion?" "Those were massive wins. Henderson was my strategy that you presented as yours," Marcus said calmly. "They left 6 months after implementation failed. Morrison was a team effort led by James in analytics. Your contribution was the pitch presentation. Should I continue, or would you like to stop pretending these were your achievements?" Richard looked between them uncomfortably. "Marcus, what are you proposing here?" "Sarah has 3 options," Marcus said, his voice businesslike and free of emotion. 1. Accept a demotion to a role that matches her actual skills, perhaps leading our client presentations and proposal development where her presentation abilities would be valuable. 2. Transition to a consulting role outside the main operations chain, working on specific projects where her strategic thinking can be useful without operational responsibilities. 3. Accept a generous severance package and leave the company. Sarah stood abruptly. "This is a witch hunt. You're using your temporary authority to settle personal vendettas." "If this were personal, you'd already be fired," Marcus replied quietly. "These options give you choices, which is more than you gave the people whose work you stole. I'm offering you a way to stay in a role that actually suits your abilities. That's not revenge. That's resource optimization." Richard cleared his throat. "Sarah, I think option 2 makes sense. You're talented at strategic thinking and client relationships. Let's find a way for you to contribute in those areas without operational oversight." The meeting ended with Sarah agreeing to the consulting transition, though her exit made clear she felt cornered rather than grateful. After she left, Richard looked at Marcus with something between relief and concern. "That was harsh. That was necessary," Marcus corrected. "You brought me in to fix the culture. Culture change starts at the top. If I'd let Sarah maintain her position despite clear evidence of poor performance, everyone would know the transformation was performative rather than real." Over the following months, Marcus implemented his transformation plan with surgical precision. He promoted based on actual results rather than political savvy. He created transparent performance metrics that made it impossible to hide behind presentations and promises. He rebuilt client relationships by admitting past failures and demonstrating new commitment to delivery. He restructured teams to reward collaboration over competition. But most importantly, he changed the story the company told itself. Instead of "we're innovative industry leaders," the new narrative became "we're committed to earning back trust through consistent excellence." Instead of celebrating big wins, they celebrated project completion rates and client satisfaction scores. Instead of promoting people who looked like leaders, they promoted people who led through results. The changes weren't universally popular. 3 senior managers resigned rather than adapt to the new expectations. Several employees who'd thrived in the old political environment struggled in a system that valued substance. But something interesting happened. The people who remained became energized. For the first time in years, hard work was rewarded, more than clever positioning. Results mattered more than relationships. Merit began to matter again. 6 months into the engagement, Marcus presented his progress report to the board of directors. Client retention had improved by 22%. Employee satisfaction scores had jumped 30 points. 3 major clients who'd left had returned. Revenue was up 18% despite no increase in headcount. "How did you accomplish this?" one board member asked, genuinely puzzled. "We've hired consultants before. They write reports that sit on shelves. What did you do differently?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I didn't give you a report to implement. I implemented the changes myself, with authority to make hard decisions. I didn't optimize your existing culture. I changed it. And most importantly, I didn't try to make everyone happy. I focused on making the company functional, even when it was uncomfortable." After the presentation, Richard pulled Marcus aside. "The board wants to offer you a permanent position. Chief Operating Officer. You'd have full authority over operations and direct report to me. Name your price." Marcus had expected this offer. He'd prepared for it. But standing there, hearing it out loud, he felt the old pull. The temptation of vindication, of showing everyone who doubted him that he belonged at the top table. The temptation of going from ghost to visible triumph. He took a breath. I appreciate that, Richard. But I'm going to decline. Richard looked genuinely shocked. Can I ask why? You've proven you can do the job. We need you. Because if I take that role, I become part of the same system I just fixed, Marcus explained. I become subject to board politics, shareholder pressure, all the constraints that led to these problems in the first place. Strategic Growth Advisors works because I stay independent. I can tell clients hard truths because I don't depend on them for my livelihood. I can make tough calls because I'm not worried about my next promotion. The moment I become an employee again, I lose what makes me effective. So this was always temporary? Richard asked. This engagement was temporary, but I'd be happy to continue working with Innovate Solutions as a retained consultant. Quarterly check-ins, strategic guidance, help with major decisions. You'd get my expertise without trying to fit me into a corporate structure I've outgrown. Richard considered this. I can't say I'm not disappointed, but I understand. And honestly, it makes sense. You've built something valuable by staying independent. Why give that up? They worked out a consulting retainer agreement that gave Innovate Solutions ongoing access to Marcus's expertise without requiring him to give up his independence. It was a better deal for both sides, and it maintained the dynamic that made Marcus effective. On his last day of full-time engagement, Marcus stood in the same break room where he'd eaten cake at his goodbye party 2 years earlier. The space looked the same, but everything else had changed. Employees who'd once gossiped about politics now talked about project outcomes. Managers who'd once fought for credit now collaborated on solutions. The culture wasn't perfect, no culture ever is, but it was functional and honest in a way it hadn't been before. Jennifer met him in the parking lot as he left the building. So, how does it feel? Returning to the scene of the crime victorious? Marcus loaded his laptop bag into his car, thinking about the question. You know what's strange? It doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like work I did well. The vindication I thought I'd feel never came because I didn't need it. I'd already proven everything I needed to prove to the only person whose opinion actually mattered. Myself. That's very zen, Jennifer said with a smile. So what's next for Strategic Growth Advisors? We keep doing what we're doing, Marcus replied. Taking on clients who need real change, not just consulting reports. Building our reputation through results, not marketing. Staying selective about who we work with. The Ghost Protocol doesn't end just because we had one visible success. If anything, it's more important now to stay strategic about where we appear and where we remain invisible. Over the next year, Marcus built on the foundation he'd established. Strategic Growth Advisors grew to 8 employees, all carefully selected for both competence and character. They took on increasingly complex engagements, always with the same philosophy. Substance over appearance, results over promises, independence over integration. Marcus occasionally ran into former colleagues from Innovate Solutions at industry events. The conversations were professionally cordial, but notably different from before. People treated him with a respect that came from demonstrated capability rather than corporate hierarchy. He was no longer fighting for a seat at tables. He was building his own tables and choosing who sat at them. Sarah Mitchell, he heard through the grapevine, had left Innovate Solutions after a few months in her consulting role and taken a position at another firm. Marcus felt no satisfaction in this news, just a mild relief that their paths were unlikely to cross again. She'd become what she'd always been in his mind, a lesson learned, not an enemy to defeat. The Ghost Protocol had taught Marcus something profound about power. Real power isn't about being seen as powerful. It's about having the freedom to choose when to be visible and when to remain in the shadows. It's about building systems that work without your constant intervention. It's about creating value that speaks for itself. It's about becoming someone people seek out rather than someone who has to seek validation. 3 years after leaving Innovate Solutions in defeat, Marcus sat in his expanded office reviewing proposals for new client engagements. His company had become exactly what he'd envisioned, a boutique firm known for excellence, sought after by companies willing to pay premium rates for genuine expertise, staffed by talented people who chose substance over politics. He thought about Machiavelli sometimes, the Renaissance philosopher whose ideas had inspired his approach. Machiavelli had written about power, strategy, and the importance of appearing one way while being another. But Marcus had learned something Machiavelli hadn't explicitly written. The most powerful deception isn't pretending to be something you're not. It's understanding when to be visible and when to disappear, when to fight and when to ghost, when to prove yourself and when to let results speak louder than any defense. Marcus had disappeared from drama and returned untouchable not because he'd become immune to attack or impossible to hurt. He'd become untouchable because he'd built a life where attacks didn't matter, where drama couldn't reach him, where his value was so evident that defending it was unnecessary. He'd learned that the best revenge wasn't proving enemies wrong, it was making them irrelevant. His phone buzzed with a text from an old mentor. Saw the article about your firm in Business Weekly. Congratulations on your success. Marcus hadn't known there was an article. He pulled it up on his computer and skimmed through it, a feature on boutique consulting firms that were disrupting the industry through radical transparency and results-focused approaches. His quote in the article caught his eye. "We succeed by staying small enough to maintain integrity and selective enough to work only with clients who genuinely want change. Growth for growth's sake dilutes quality. We'd rather be a secret worth discovering than a brand everyone knows." He smiled at his own words. The Ghost Protocol continued. Even in visibility, he remained partially hidden. Even in success, he stayed strategic about exposure. Even in victory, he remembered the lessons from defeat. Because Marcus Chen had learned the most important truth about power, success, and untouchability. They aren't destinations you reach. They're principles you practice. Every day, he chose to focus on substance over appearance, independence over integration, results over recognition. Every day, he chose to be the kind of professional who didn't need to fight for respect because his work commanded it naturally. The drama that had once defined him was now just a story he occasionally told to clients facing similar situations. A cautionary tale about the costs of playing games you can't win, and an inspiring reminder that sometimes the smartest move is disappearing completely, building something real in the shadows, and returning only when you're ready, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to contribute on your own terms. That was the Ghost Protocol. That was what it meant to be untouchable. And that was how Marcus Chen transformed defeat into wisdom, silence into power, and disappearance into the ultimate strategic advantage. The office phone rang. Another potential client, another opportunity, another chapter in a story that had started with humiliation and transformed into something far more valuable. Freedom. Marcus picked up the phone, ready to listen, ready to help, ready to do it all on his terms. Because in the end, that's what Machiavelli had really been saying all along. The game isn't won by those who fight hardest. It's won by those who understand which games are worth playing, which battles are worth fighting, and which victories come not from confrontation, but from strategically becoming someone no one can touch.